It started with the airport explosion that led to missile attacks inside Saudi Arabia, and with the rising conflict between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia, has the impact of the U.S.-Iran war finally spread throughout the entire region? This is the question that surrounds the renewed tension between the two sides. What triggered the resurgence of the conflict between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia? How deep and how long-standing is the conflict between the two forces that could possibly lead to a large-scale war? And what is the connection of the U.S.-Iran war to their renewed exchange of attacks? That's what we'll discuss today, only here on Mr. Good Vibes Shorts. On July 13, 2026, a series of explosions rocked Sanaa International Airport in Yemen. The main runway of the said airport was targeted and hit just as an Iranian passenger plane from Tehran was approaching. The plane was a Mahan Air Airbus A340. On board were members of the Houthi delegation returning home after attending the funeral in Tehran of the late supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Khamenei was killed. On February 28, 2026, at the start of the war, the United States and Israel launched against Iran. But this was no ordinary pickup and drop-off trip. On July 3, a Mahan airplane also landed in Sanaa to pick up the Houthi delegation. That was the first openly acknowledged Iranian flight to Sanaa in more than a decade. On that day, the Houthis accused Saudi warplanes of attempting to block the landing of the said plane. They threatened to attack Saudi airports and key facilities if it happened again. And when the delegation returned on July 13, that's when the conflict erupted. According to Yemen's internationally recognized government, they offered to send the delegation home using Yemenia, Yemen's national airline. But the Houthis reportedly refused and insisted on a direct flight with Mahan Air, an Iranian-owned airline, without permission from the government that controls Yemen's official airspace. They wouldn't back down. You know, the Houthis are an armed group supported by Iran that controls Sanaa and a large part of northern Yemen, but they are not recognized as the official government of the country. The internationally recognized government, on the other hand, is recognized by the UN in most countries, is based in Aden, controls much of the south and east, and is supported by Saudi Arabia. And for the internationally recognized government of Yemen, this is not just a matter of one airplane, it's a matter of sovereignty. If an Iranian plane is allowed to fly directly to Sanaa without clearance, it's as if the Houthis are saying that they are the ones who truly control the country's airspace. The accusation is even more serious. The Yemeni government said that the flight is connected to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and may be carrying military personnel, intelligence, and dual-use equipment. There are also U.S. officials who said that the plane might be carrying weapons, missile parts, and military experts. But those are all just allegations. No evidence has been presented to prove what was inside the plane. According to the Houthis, the plane was only carrying their delegation patients and Yemenis who were stranded in Iran. So the question many are asking is, who really bombed the runway? The internationally recognized government of Yemen officially claimed responsibility for the attack. They said their own forces struck the runway to prevent the unauthorized Iranian aircraft, but the Houthis insisted otherwise. That Saudi Arabia was the real attacker, and they called it outright aggression. Riyadh did not directly admit that Saudi forces carried out the strike. However, Axios, a well-known American digital news agency, reported based on U.S. officials that the Saudi military carried out the bombing after Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman requested support from President Donald Trump. In other words, there are accusations in a separate report, but there is still no complete independent confirmation. The only thing clear is that the runway was repeatedly hit, forcing the Mahan airplane to divert and land at Hodeidah Airport on the Red Sea coast. But the strike that was supposed to stop a plane is now the one that reopened old wounds. Only a few hours have passed. The Houthis then sent ballistic missiles and drones towards Saudi Arabia. A few hours after the runway strike in Sanaa, the Houthis retaliated and targeted a civilian airport. The target was inside Saudi Arabia. According to Houthi military spokesman Yahya Saree, Their forces carried out an operation against Abha International Airport in Asir Province, southwestern Saudi Arabia. This region is close to the border of Yemen, so it's easier to reach than Riyadh or Jeddah. It is also an important gateway for residents, tourists, and domestic flights in southern Saudi. This kind of threat is not new to Abha. The Houthis have targeted it several times in recent years. In fact, in 2019, a cruise missile hit the arrivals hall of the same airport and injured 26 people. The Houthis said they used several ballistic missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles or drones, but they did not say how many were launched, what models were used, or which ones got through Saudi defenses. There was also no clear video or independent assessment released to confirm that a projectile directly hit the airport. According to the Saudi-led coalition, Saudi air defenses successfully engaged and intercepted the ballistic missiles heading to the southern region. The coalition did not provide details about the drones mentioned by the Houthis. There were also no reports of deaths or injuries, and no confirmed damage to the runway, terminal, airplane, or control tower. In other words, the Houthis launched weapons, but that doesn't mean they destroyed the target. Saudi Arabia issued a strong warning. Saudi Armed Forces spokesperson Major General Turki al-Malki said that any attempt to attack the kingdom, its citizens, or its national assets will be met with firmness and unprecedented force. Or in other words, don't try us because the response could be much harsher. But up to now, there have been no reports of a large-scale Saudi bombing campaign against the Houthis in retaliation for the missile barrage. For now, Riyadh has responded with defensive measures and a strong warning. At the same time, the Saudi-backed Yemeni leadership is urging against escalating the confrontation. This is a sign that some want to put the brakes before both sides plunge back into all-out war. The Houthis, on the other hand, did the opposite and further raised the tension. Yahya Ayassari warned airlines to avoid Saudi airspace until they lift what they call the blockade on Sanaa airport. Senior Houthi official Mohammed al-Bukaidi said that they are capable of paralyzing airports and imposing a siege against Saudi Arabia. But why did the Houthis immediately blame Saudi? And why did they attack them right away? What is their history that made the Houthis so angry at Saudi Arabia? At first, it wasn't Saudi and the Houthis who were the main enemies. Before, the Houthis were fighting against the central government of Yemen. But everything changed in 2014 when they took over Sanaa and gradually seized the main government institutions. At that time, the president of Yemen, President Abdrabbu Mansur Hadi, the leader of the internationally recognized government, was forced to flee. He first went to Aden, but when the Houthis advanced there as well, he fled to Saudi Arabia and asked for military assistance. That's when Riyadh got fully involved. They didn't want a powerful militia on the other side of their border, especially if it was getting closer and closer to Iran, Riyadh's main regional rival. So in March 2015, Saudi Arabia formed a coalition and launched an air campaign to restore Hadi's government to power. What was expected to be a quick operation lasted for many years. Saudi Arabia didn't just provide bombs. They supported the Yemeni government with money, weapons, training, intelligence, diplomatic backing, and assistance to local forces fighting the Houthis. They also helped the government stay in Aden after it lost control of Sanaa. So when we say Saudi-backed Yemeni government, it's literal. Without Saudi support, the side recognized by the international community would have had a much harder time, or might have completely collapsed. But for the Houthis, that government is just a puppet of Riyadh. In their view, Saudi Arabia is using Yemeni officials to control the country from the outside. They also point to the years of Saudi-led airstrikes and restrictions on airports and seaports as proof that Riyadh is their real enemy. But the Saudis have a different story. For them, air and sea restrictions are necessary to prevent weapons and military equipment from reaching the Houthis. They also say their presence is needed to protect the border and restore the legitimate government. That's why two different narratives are clashing. And as the fighting drags on, the Houthis retaliate even more through local insurgencies. They learn to launch ballistic missiles and drones against Saudi airports, oil facilities, border towns, and other strategic targets. The Saudi-led coalition responded with even more airstrikes. Saudi Arabia is one of the countries with the most modern air force in the Middle East. So they didn't hesitate to attack. It's like an endless brawl. When one side drops bombs, the other retaliates. The ones really caught in the middle are the ordinary Yemenis. Millions went hungry, were displaced, or lost access to medicine and basic services. By 2022, both sides were already exhausted. A UN-brokered truce or ceasefire reduced the fighting. Even after it expired, the Saudis and the Houthis continued informal de-escalation and peace talks. That's the peace that's now at risk of being lost. If the Saudis launch large-scale airstrikes again and the Houthis continue attacking airports, Yemen could return to its previous cycle of violence. And this time, more than just an internal conflict is at stake. Because behind the rise of the Houthis, there's another country involved, and that is none other than Iran. That's the name that always comes up when talking about how the Houthis became a regional military power. Iran and Saudi Arabia have been rivals for a long time. For Riyadh, the rise of any Iran-aligned group in Yemen is a direct threat because it's right on the country's southern border. Iran did not create the Houthis. The group has existed long before Iran's support became significant. But as the war escalated after 2014, Iran saw an opportunity to have a strong ally in Saudi Arabia's backyard. That's when their military capability began to rise. Over the years, Iran reportedly provided missile and drone designs, components, technical knowledge, training, and assistance in assembling or modifying weapons. There have been intercepted shipments and missile debris found to contain Iranian origin components, according to the United Nations and Western governments. It doesn't mean that all weapons are ready to fire when they arrive from Iran. The Houthis also have their own engineers, workshops, and local manufacturing capability. But it was Iranian expertise that helped make their missiles and drones reach farther and become more powerful. In other words, the Houthis already had their own punch, but Iran helped them extend their reach. Before, they were just a local insurgency in northern Iran. Now they are capable of threatening Saudi cities, oil facilities, airports, and even cities in Israel, and ships passing through the Red Sea. That's a huge upgrade for a group that doesn't have a conventional air force to speak of. But it's also not right to think that the Houthis will immediately follow just one call from Iran. They have their own leadership, territory, and agenda. There have been times when they've made decisions even if it wasn't Iran's advice. It's more fitting to call them strategic partners rather than just boss and subordinate. Both of them benefit from the relationship. The Houthis get weapons, training, political backing, and a broader regional status. Iran, on the other hand, gets an ally who can pressure Saudi Arabia and disrupt shipping in the Red Sea without having to send a large Iranian army. This is where the attendance of the Houthi delegation at Ali Khamenei's funeral becomes important. It's not just a simple gesture of condolence. It's a public display that the Houthis consider themselves part of the axis of resistance, the network of Iran-aligned groups opposing the influence of the U.S. and Israel. And now that the United States and Iran are directly at war, the role of the Houthis has become even more dangerous. Saudi Arabia tried to avoid direct involvement in the war. Riyadh doesn't want its cities, oil facilities, and economic projects to become a battlefield. But if Iran uses Yemen to increase pressure against its rivals, it's hard for Saudi Arabia to remain neutral. This is the strategic nightmare. Iran can pressure shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, while the Houthis can threaten the Bab el-Mandeb Strait in the Red Sea. Two narrow passages, both crucial for oil, cargo ships, and global trade. If both have problems at the same time, it won't just affect the Middle East, but also fuel prices, shipping costs, and the global supply chain. That's why the airport clash isn't just an old war in Yemen. It could be a bridge connecting the Saudi-Houthi conflict to a bigger U.S.-Iran war. And if the Houthis block the Red Sea again, there's another country that could directly join in, Israel. And If Israel gets involved, that's when the fire could really spread. But let's get straight to the question. Is this the beginning of a wider Middle East war? Not yet. At least not just because of a single runway strike or a targeted missile barrage. But this is the biggest breakdown of the Saudi-Houthi de-escalation since 2022. This means the door is once again open to a conflict that people have been trying to close for years. There is a clear escalation ladder. If the Houthis launch more missiles or drones against Saudi airports or cities, most likely Riyadh will be forced to retaliate more heavily. If the large-scale Saudi air campaign in Yemen resumes, the Houthis could expand their targets as well. Senior Houthi official Mohammed al-Bukaidi warned that the Bab el-Mandeb is a strategic card they can use against countries attacking Yemen. In other words, if the conflict escalates further, cargo ships and oil tankers could be the Houthis' next targets. This is not an empty threat, in fact. After the Gaza war began in 2023, the Houthis attacked ships they claimed were connected to Israel and the U.S. There were ships that were seized, damaged, and sunk, with no less than 9 sailors killed, forcing major shipping companies to avoid the Red Sea and reroute around southern Africa. Longer journeys mean more fuel, higher insurance costs, and more expensive deliveries. The United States and United Kingdom retaliated with airstrikes against Houthi missile sites, radar, and weapons facilities. Israel also directly bombed Houthi-controlled ports, power infrastructure, and Sanaa airport in response to missiles launched toward Israeli territory. So if the Houthis attack the shipping lane, or Israel again, it's likely that the same countries will return to Yemen. And since there's already a direct U.S.-Iran war, it's harder to treat each new strike as a separate incident. This is a nightmare for the global economy. Pressure from Iran in the Strait of Hormuz, while the Houthis threaten the Bab el-Mandeb. If both choke points encounter problems, the oil supply, Suez Canal traffic, shipping schedules, insurance rates, and the prices of products in different countries will be affected, including our beloved Philippines. But we can't rule out the scenario of an all-out war. There are those who want to put the brakes on, including the Saudi-backed Yemeni leadership, the UN, and countries hoping that peace talks will resume. What we need to watch out for are the next moves. Will there be another Houthi attack against Saudi? Will Saudi launch a massive bombing campaign? Will the Houthis attack commercial ships again? Or will there be missiles flying toward Israel again? If those things happen next, this will no longer be a simple Yemen conflict. This will become a chain reaction. The Houthis against Saudi, Israel against the Houthis, the U.S. against Iran, 2 major sea lanes simultaneously at risk, and Gulf region countries that are also continuously attacked by Iran, who might retaliate at any moment if they reach their limit. That's how a regional war starts. There's not always a formal declaration. Sometimes it just starts with a plane that wasn't allowed to land, a runway that was bombed, and retaliations that no one wants to stop. But it eventually leads to a bigger war. If you like this video, please share it with others and subscribe as well. Also, watch the videos on the right so you can spend even more of your time